Hello. Thank you very much for joining us on the Odgers Berndsen One Question series for winter 22-23. My name is Jules McKean, as you probably know now, running the global media practice out of London for Odgers Berndsen Executive Search. Could not be more delighted to be joined today by Alex Michael. Hi, Alex.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. And thank you for joining us. So I'm going to do a quick intro to Alex before we hear his incredible kind of predictions of how we are weathering or not weathering this storm, which is clearly already, in some ways, already on us. So Alex Michael co-heads LionTree Growth, providing M&A advisory and capital raising services to the emerging areas of the digital economy, with particular emphasis on sports, audio, and digital media. So it's going to be really interesting, a variety of sectors going into 2023. Alex also serves as Chief Development Officer of Infinite SPAC, LionTree's co-sponsored public acquisition vehicle with Kevin Durant, Rich Kleiman, and 35 Ventures. And he previously led national sales for Living Social, the Amazon and venture-backed social e-commerce company, which was sold to Groupon. And before that, he served as VP of Business Development at MSG Sports, a division of publicly held Madison Square Garden Company, where he led the group responsible for evaluating and acquiring new events and franchises for the sports segment, home to the New York Knicks and the New York Rangers. Prior to MSG, he was Director of Business Development for Ticketmaster, part of Live Nation now, as you all know, handling new business and partnership opportunities and executing M&A transactions, and has an MBA from Harvard and a graduate from Brown. So I already feel absolutely intimidated, Alex.
I think everyone's they're already bored of me, but we'll try.
No.
Thank you for that. That's appreciated. Yes.
No, and so who better really to answer this question, you know, from your kind of your breadth of different sectors, that, you know, real depth in sort of sport and media in particular, and the digital economy. All of those are reacting in different ways as we come into 2023 and the macroeconomic headwinds. How do you think that, whether it's your industry or the industries in which you invest, are going to weather the storm?
Well, we come, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. Incredible practice, and it's a real honor to be here. So thank you for that. And well, you know, we cover a lot of ground here at LionTree and LionTree Growth, which is the area of LionTree focused on those emerging areas, as you spoke about. And they're not all created equal in terms of how I think the next year will unfold. You know, let's click on sports for a second, which is an area we spend a lot of time on, especially from a sports tech perspective. But just overall, sports is an incredibly vibrant area right now, both from really an M&A perspective, which is a bright spot in an otherwise fairly gloomy M&A outlook, but also from an investing perspective, whether it's the teams themselves or companies in the ecosystem. And I think that'll continue. I think people realize that this is an industry that has multiple tailwinds, that there is a great enthusiasm for watching the contests live, certainly watching them at home, and that's irrespective of economic conditions. And I think we'll continue to see great interest there from the investor perspective, as well as the M&A perspective. And so we're spending a lot of time with that. And I think that'll continue. And obviously we have World Cup going on, but just the normal professional sports schedule continues to be robust. Some of it is the pandemic bounce back.
Yeah.
But it'll still keep going. So I just, that's a very, very vibrant area, and we spend a lot of time. I think gaming is another one. We have a terrific gaming practice here at LionTree. Worked on Take-Two, acquiring Zynga earlier this year, but lots of other things. And I think that is another area that is very much recession resistant. And so sports, gaming, big belief in those, and I think they'll continue to be vibrant regardless of the economic conditions. Others, that's harder. And again, we focus on smaller, smaller deals to a certain extent, let's say 100 million to $1 billion within LionTree Growth. That's an area where you don't need credit as much as you do, obviously, the bigger deals, especially if private equity is involved. And so I expect that area, our area, to continue to be fairly fertile, even in what is going to be, I believe, a tough 2023, because you don't have to deal as much with the credit markets. But there is an overhang, certainly when you have the equity markets shut as of today, and just the overhang of public companies that have clearly come down dramatically in valuation as it pertains to private companies.
Does that change, Alex? Do you think that will change a little bit the lens of the metrics of which investors are looking at within those digital businesses? Does that have an impact?
Yeah, of course. It's a great question. You know, we have gone from a M&A marketplace that largely in the last couple of years has looked at revenue multiples,
Uh-huh.
uh, to one that is focused on cash flow, on EBITDA. And I think that's here to stay for a while. And it makes sense, right? And the capital markets and the equity markets have punished those companies that have said, well, we can just turn off the marketing dollars and whenever we want, unless we have this enormously profitable business. People say, show me the profits today. And in fact, we're going to value you on those profits. And I think that is here to stay for a while. It's been a big change in the last 9 months.
Yeah.
There are outliers, and of course, in the private company world, you have plenty of companies of this size that do not have profits to value themselves on, so you back into a revenue multiple. But nonetheless, there is absolutely a transition to cash flow orientation for how we value these opportunities.
That's really interesting. And during the course of this season of One Question, we've talked to a number of company leaders who are either in platform businesses and broadcasters, which are to a greater or lesser extent advertiser funded, also to gaming companies who are increasingly have advertising dollars moving from one into them, and in quite an interesting creative way, in some cases quite immersive. Do you think that there is anything that we've learned from the impact of the pandemic sudden cuts in advertising that took people a while to then buy their way back into the market that might insulate a little bit the kind of, obviously there is a drop already in the advertising spend, no question, but there seems to be more opportunity to go into gaming and to try new things and have more metrics around it. And I also wonder whether actually people being at home more might prop up some of that broadcasting. What's your feeling of that as a revenue model going forward? And is it important to just make sure there's a diversification of possible monetization strategies, just to be careful?
Yeah, let me pull on that last thread, which I think is the one that we are particularly focused on as a thematic, which is any brand, and the term omni-channel that is very much associated with retail, because it's really retailers that had to adopt that ability to sell across wherever the consumer was, in the last 15 years or so. That concept has to be applied to every business today. And so that means to me that you are wherever the customer may be, and you're monetizing them however you can monetize them. And so if that's subscription, if that's advertising, if it's e-commerce, if it's potentially Web3, if it's live, you have to try and be there and not be defined by any particular mode of monetization. And I think that is where we're headed. That's where we are. And I think that confluence of that omni-channel approach across these different monetization avenues is absolutely how brands are going to survive and thrive in the future. So it's a longer answer to your question about advertising versus subscription, but I would just take it a step further, which is you have to have many different options, I think, as a business today. And the good news is you've never had more wherewithal to do that. There's never been more tools, more channels. And I think the winners going forward will seize on that and be effective in talking to their customers and growing their share of wallet across everything they do than any time before. So I think the quick answer is yes, there'll be more diversification, and I think it'll keep going further than just that advertising subscription trade-off.
It's very interesting what you talked about, the share of wallet, and I think when we sit in our practice, when we're placing chief execs boards across sport media, gaming, gambling, and esports, and everything comes into that breadth as well. Actually, that convergence of fighting for share of attention and share of wallet across all of those from your audiences. I don't know if you found this, but certainly I found that some subsectors of our industry have recognized their competition as significantly broader than others have. And some are comparing themselves as a sort of like for like with whether it's a linear broadcaster or whether it's a specific gaming company. But actually, it is, as we've seen through the pandemic, people have just got limited amount of time, limited amount of money, and that is going to be under significant pressure. Do you see that they're having to open out what they see as their competitive set when you're having people pitch to you?
I think so, absolutely. I think there's two perspectives to that. One is how the marketplace perceives you and how you're competitive there. And then I think there's also the perspective of the company itself and how it orients itself to competition and
Yes.
how it succeeds. And so I think on the latter, if you're defining yourself as the best in one singular silo or category, you're probably doing a disservice to the motivation and ultimately the strategy of the business to say we're dominant and we're good. Clearly, you have to watch all your flanks and grow into other areas around your moat, let's say, to be successful. And I think really engage and motivate your employees. I do. From the marketplace perspective, I entirely agree as well in terms of you are competing with lots of different ways for people to spend their time and money. And if you're at least not, you have to at the very least be cognizant of those other places, but likely start progressing into some of them as long as it makes sense. At the end of the day, especially if you're public, obviously people can make investment decisions and diversify on their own. So there's always been that sort of conglomerate overhang, at least for a long time. However, I think in this economy and the digitization, you do have to pay attention there, and you may have to progress into areas that I think previously you would have left on the sidelines. So I think it's a very important mix, both for the internal and the external of these companies, that they embrace where their customers are beyond just the singular channel they may have been defined by previously.
Very interesting. A question for you right at the top. We talked about your sport career, and obviously you've continued to invest in sport broadly and sport technology and media. Given that sport teams in particular have such loyalty of fandom, and therefore are brands in themselves, and as everybody knows, quantifiably, brands who've invested in brands through recessions have done better than those who've just focused on short-term metrics. Certainly not my paper, other people's work. Would you say that there are areas where other brands that companies like you invest in can learn from sport and how they engage with fans and how they build that brand feeling? Because that carries a lot of weight, doesn't it, when it comes to to removing attrition rates, so which is going to reducing attrition rates of customers.
Oh, that's a tough question. Because I think sport has some very unique characteristics, in terms of how we as a humanity engage and consume and just have passion for these types of activities, starting as kids usually. And so there's a life cycle to fandom that is very hard for other brands to achieve. Let's face it, because we have different uses, whereas sports is a persistence, often through a lot of fans' lives, from participation to spectator. So it's a tough question to say how other brands can look at sports. But I think at the end of the day, the brands that are successful are the ones that people really are passionate about and care about and believe deliver them value. And it is a rare brand where people speak in the same way glowingly as they do, especially if the team is winning in sports. But I think of a business like Clear here in the United States, where they have created such a wonderful product and such a terrific service that you just speak just so positively about that. And that to me is like sports. Like, I'm just so happy to engage in it. I do engage in it. You have to engage in it. You don't have to, but you select into it. And it's the same in some cases there. That's one example of sports. So I think it's all about having a tremendous customer experience and one that hopefully elicits passion. But, sports has an unfair advantage, I think, in that sense, because it's so captivating and such a long journey for people engaged in it that they, in some ways, have people acting irrationally, and not just as,
so that member gets member, isn't there, even when they have a baby, that's another member. And final question from me, Alex. If you are an entrepreneur with some runs on the board, to use a very British, I suppose, is it a British term or a baseball term or cricket? I'm not sure. And it's 2023 and they're pitching to some team like you. What is the one, in this environment, what's the one piece of advice you would give them?
Oh, geez.
That's a totally unfair question.
One piece.
Or maybe one thing they need to focus on a bit more this year than they might have done in previous years.
Well, let me answer that, maybe not as precisely, but I'd like to harp on what I characterize as M&A hygiene. And if you are orienting yourself towards doing an M&A transaction, what are the things that you can do to prepare? And I think of all those things, maybe the one thing is to make sure your financial house is in order, that you have both really strong leadership of your financial organization, whether that's a CFO or a proximate to that, and that you've spent the time to really make sure your historical numbers are solid, but you're also putting great care and great granularity against your future projections. And I think people sometimes, in the spirit of just growth and enthusiasm and focused on the strategy, perhaps don't bring that same rigor to the financial function. And if there's one piece, like really own in on making sure you are very tight there, because it can save you a lot of headaches down the road, let alone be a playbook to run your business. So I think the finance function, especially for growth companies, is one that needs a great deal of care, and something I would harp on if people are thinking about this journey. But a quick second, and maybe more importantly, in terms of how we function, and I know you asked for one, but just do a real gut check as a human, as a person, of what you want. And I think sometimes that gets lost. People have investors, they have boards, and of course they have to be cognizant of the wishes of those people. But whoever's leading these organizations, this is especially at this level of company, this private company, this emerging company, this is such a personal decision. You're investing more than anything, which is your time. And so really get underneath what would make you happy and what the North Star looks like, and try to infuse that into what you're doing, because I think you'll just be a lot happier doing that. And I think these are ultimately people involved here across the board. And I think that sometimes the inertia and the momentum and just the craziness of building can lead you to not really check in with yourself. And so I think that's an important part of this as well.
That's brilliant. Alex, what a great place to land. Lots going on, a huge swirl and whirlwind of macroeconomic factors, people building businesses in, kind of in extremis, but not losing sight of the humanity. Thank you very much. And thanks for coming on to One Question. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you. It was fun.